In this video, I'm going to take a look at two Zeiss Jena Pancolars, starting with the 50 f1.8. It's one of the classic M42 mount lenses. It's not the fastest vintage fast 50, but it has a reputation for being one of the best standard 50mm lenses from the late 1960s and 70s, with owners praising its sharpness and the beautiful way it renders images, especially wide-open bokeh. My copy of the Pancolar f1.8 is the 8-bladed radioactive version, which adds to the thrill as well as the complications of using the lens. I'm a big fan of the lens, but with some important caveats. Alongside the review of the f1.8, I thought you might find it interesting if I compared it to its half-brother, or sister, or whatever, the Pancolar 50 f2. It'll be interesting for me as well, because this is the first time I've studied both lenses side by side. My f2 is an Exakta mount lens, and it's not radioactive. The f2 is, in my opinion, one of the most handsome lenses ever made. I acquired the lens attached to an Exakta VX1000 camera. I was really after the camera, not the lens for a change. To me, the combination of camera and lens, with zebra stylings, looks fabulous. Before I purchased the f2, I didn't think I needed both the f1.8 and the f2 version. The f1.8 alone was more than good enough, and without any research, I suspected that the f2 was simply a modified version of the faster lens. But I was wrong, because the Pancolar f2 has a different optical design, and while it's also an excellent performer, it renders in a different way to the f1.8, as I'll show you later in the video. Let's begin with a head-to-head comparison of the lens specs. Both lenses were made in East Germany. My radioactive lens was made sometime between 1964 and 1967, while my Exakta mount f2 was made between 1967 and 1970. Apparently non-radioactive versions of the f1.8 continued to be made until around 1980. As I mentioned, my lenses have M42 and Exakta mounts. The Pancolar f2 also came in an M42 mount. The lenses are branded Zeiss Jena. Some of the later lenses don't have the full Zeiss name, but have variations on the name Jena, especially for some export models. There was some kind of ban on using the Zeiss brand name outside the Eastern Bloc. There are a number of important variations of the f1.8 lens, including 8 blades versus 6 blades, zebra styling versus non-zebra styling, radioactive versus non-radioactive glass, and single coating versus multi-coating. My copy is the 8-bladed, single-coated radioactive zebra version. The 6-bladed versions are generally not radioactive, so the number of blades can be one way to tell whether the lens glass is radioactive or not. Yellowing of the glass is another giveaway, although not all lenses with yellow glass are radioactive. If you test my lens with the Geiger-Müller counter, you'll find it has a good dose of thorium baked into the glass. Shouldn't be dangerous to health levels if you're careful. I retested 3 of my radioactive lenses for this video, and here are the results. My counter is pretty basic, but you can see at least in relative terms the Pancolar is not the most radioactive. That accolade goes to the Tomioka. An interesting finding from this test is that the Pancolar's front elements are nearly as radioactive as the rear elements, unlike most other radioactive lenses, which tend to have most of the action in their rear elements. The radioactive versions of the Pancolar f1.8 do tend to develop very yellow glass over the years, with an almost golden glow, unless somebody has de-yellowed the glass. As an aside, if you really want to see more of a golden glow from a radioactive lens, then take a look at the faster Pancolar, the 55 f1.4, one of the very rare old lenses in all senses of the word. I recently had a chance to play with the f1.4, and I have to say it's an impressive beast of a lens, highly desirable, producing beautiful images. But it sells for many times the price of an f1.8. It's an expensive old lens. Anyway, back to the Pancolar f1.8s. I've never tried the 6-bladed non-zebra, non-radioactive versions, so this video is about my version only. The f2 also came in different body designs. Mine is the classic zebra design. If you happen to own other versions of these lenses, please add your experiences with the other versions in the comments below the video. I'd be very interested to read them. In terms of the optical designs, the f1.8 Pancolars have 6 elements in 5 groups, while the f2 has 6 elements in 4 groups. Here's a technical diagram of the f2. 6-4 rather than 6-5 is more of a biotard type design used in the Helios 44-2, for example, an indication that the f2 could produce a different style of image to the f1.8. The f2 has 6 blades rather than 8, 6 blades being the more common configuration for these Pancolars, so if you like octagons rather than hexagons in your out-of-focus highlights, the extra blades of the f1.8 will make a difference. The f1.8 has a minimum focus distance of 0.35 meters, and this relatively short MFD really helps if you're into closer-up, smooth bokeh images. The f2's MFD, in contrast, is 0.5 meters. Not bad, but not as good as the f1.8, as I'll demonstrate later. Both lenses have stop-down mechanisms, which can be rather clunky if you're using the lens on a digital camera. The mechanisms were designed to allow photographers with film cameras to focus wide open and then stop down easily to take a shot. On the M42 mount lens, you had to pull back this lever to stop down each time, while on the Exakta mount lens, you need to push in this button. Although the mechanisms are clunky, they're actually quite useful if you want to shoot a scene both wide open and at a chosen stop-down setting. It's an easy way of switching between the two. Also noteworthy are the interesting pincers on the f2's aperture ring. They open up as you stop down the ring, perhaps indicating an increasing depth of field from the aperture settings. The other point to make about the Pancolars concerns their build quality. Generally it's okay, they seem like good solid lenses, but some owners have reported variations in build quality, and also problems with the grease the company used to lubricate the helicoids. As Pancollar owners have found, the grease tends to dry over the decades, and this makes the focus ring less smooth to turn. My f2 suffers from this. Now onto the lens's optical performance, starting with the f1.8. And we need to talk about how the f1.8 yellow glass impacts images, because the impact is very strong. Very strong, that is, if your glass has yellowed as much as mine. The yellow glass acts like a lens filter, and according to studies on the internet, the filter effect probably cuts out around f1.3 stops of light. So in effect, you're working with an equivalent of around f3.1 in terms of light, and the view through the viewfinder can be a little murky. With modern digital EVF cameras, this isn't such a big deal. But what is a big deal is the tint the glass produces. It's more of a golden brown tint, and you can see it here on these images. It is possible to adjust the tint in post-processing to produce more natural colours and have a more accurate white balance. It's not that hard to adjust the colours, but I have to say I personally struggled a bit to get the blues, especially blue skies, to look natural. The blues have what you could call a retro, slightly aged look. You can de-yellow radioactive lenses using UV light, but I decided to leave it, as it has such a lovely golden tint. Some people who have used this lens swear that the radioactive glass really does improve the transmission of light and colour through the lens, but it's impossible to prove this when the glass has become so discoloured, so this is something I'd like to investigate further with clearer glass. Because of the golden tint, over the 10 years I've owned the lens, I've used it mostly in the spring and the autumn to take advantage of the way it renders wonderful warm tones. It's produced some of my favourite spring blossom and autumn images from all my vintage lenses, images with a lot of character and seasonal atmosphere. Wide open, I think the bokeh is superb. The out of focus areas are lovely and smooth, beautifully rendered, with a dreamy quality right up there with the best bokeh lenses. Amongst other qualities, the lens has excellent into and out of focus transitions. And in the right light and shade, the subjects in focus just seem to melt into the blur. This avenue of trees is my favourite way of illustrating how good the f1.8's bokeh is. If you set the lens to wide open and its minimum focus distance, you can see just how smooth and beautiful the blur turns out. All fast 50s will produce a lot of blur in this situation, but it's not always as smooth as this. It also copes with very busy backgrounds and foregrounds pretty well. The blur is busy, but it's interesting to look at. In terms of sharpness, from wide open, the f1.8 is a sharp lens. Maybe not the sharpest I've tested, but it's easily sharp enough. You can use the lens for sharp, wide open, close-up shots on its own. It works very well with extension tubes. Or with a reversing ring. And it only gets sharper stopped down. It performs well stopped down as a standard walk around the landscape lens. Look for example at the details in this straight out of camera railway line shot. It's an impressive result edge to edge. Wide open or stopped down, the lens makes a great portrait lens, although you do need to adjust the skin tones, again thanks to those tints. Or perhaps you don't adjust the tones, if you like your subjects to have a more glowing tan. And last, but by no means least, the radioactive tints produce excellent contrasts for black and white conversions, just as old yellow filters do. The old radioactive Pancolar f1.8 really is a top lens for black and white photography. Clearly it's not the only radioactive fast 50 from the 1960s and 70s that works well for monochrome images, but it is a good one. So that's the M42 f1.8. Now on to a comparison with the Exakta mount f2. I've taken a number of shots to compare the lens's performance wide open and stopped down, and in different light. The first thing to say about the lenses is that close up as wide open bokeh lenses, both lenses, not just the f1.8, deliver beautiful results. I don't know what you think, but I think these images are rather lovely. There are, however, 4 significant differences between the lenses. Firstly, of course, the f2 lens doesn't have that radioactive tint, and this makes a big difference to straight out of camera images and colours. The radioactive lens's images can look considerably more muddy, as you can see comparing images straight out of camera. Yes, it's great to use the f1.8 lens for autumn shots, and you can post-process the colours, but the f2 without a tint is a better lens if you want more vibrant colours all year round. Again, this points to the benefits of de-yellowing the radioactive f1.8. Secondly, the f2's MFD of 0.5 meters compared to the f1.8's 0.35 meters does make a significant difference for close-up photography. And if you set both lenses to their MFDs, to take a photo of a scene with some interesting shapes and colours, like this, you can see the difference in the bokeh. The f1.8, with its slightly faster speed and closer up focus, produces a softer blurring of the background. And for the same reasons, you get bigger, juicier bokeh bubbles with the f1.8. I think the f1.8 short MFD is one of the reasons why owners rate this lens so highly as a bokeh lens, as well as the fact that the f1.8 renders out-of-focus blur rather beautifully, more beautifully than some other lens designs, such as the Tessera's for instance. A third difference between the lenses is that the f2 has 2 fewer blades than the f1.8, so as I noted earlier, it produces octagon rather than hexagon-shaped out-of-focus highlights. Where the number of blades can also make a difference is when you stop down a little, and how quickly do the blades start to show. On this, I have to say that the f1.8's blades, as you stop down a few stops from wide open, do not produce particularly attractive edges, just something to watch out for. The fourth big difference between the f1.8 and the f2 was a surprise to me when I first used the f2 and before I saw its optical design. It's that the Pancolar f2 produces swirly bokeh, something my f1.8 does not do. Take the avenue of trees I've already shown you. When the lens is wide open and at its MFD, then the swirls are very apparent. And here are some more examples. For these images, I processed the image to accentuate the swirls so you can see them better. Personally, I like the swirls. I know this is a matter of taste, but I like them. They add a je ne sais quoi to the look of an image. But given the swirls, I found the f2's bokeh to be a little more twitchy wide open when there's a busy background, even when the swirls are not so apparent. Having said that, the f2's bokeh and the out of focus highlights, the bokeh bubbles, are still very attractive. In terms of comparing the f1.8 and f2's sharpness wide open, the impression you get looking through the viewfinder is that the f1.8 is the sharper lens. This is partly because you can focus closer with the f1.8's shorter MFD without having to use the camera's focus zoom, so you're naturally closer, and that helps you to nail the focus if you're focusing close up. But more importantly, with my copy of the f2 can produce more of a soft glow to in-focus objects wide open, and this glow distracts from the appearance of sharpness. It's interesting how narrow the margins of error are with focusing these kinds of lenses wide open, because I can show you other comparisons where it looks like both lenses are both performing in a similar way. Inside, in a more controlled environment, it's easier to measure the real differences between my two lenses. These shots were taken at the same distance, 0.5 meters wide open. Cropping into the in-focus parts, you can see the differences. The f2's rendering of the letters and numbers has a slight glow or ghosting, and this distracts from the sharpness. My f1.8 in comparison is sharp, impressively sharp wide open for an old lens. Stopped down to about f8, the f2 produces fine results, good details, and especially good strong colours for a lens of its age. I'll zoom into a straight out of camera shot of Chiswick House so you can see the details the f2 delivers stopped down. The colours produced by the f2 really are good. As I mentioned earlier, one of the main aims of the f2's designers was to improve the colour balance of the lens compared to the earlier Biotars. And comparing this lens with my Biotar 58 f2, the colours are better, stronger, more accurate. There's an obvious difference. Finally, a few words about chromatic aberrations and flares. Generally, both lenses don't tend to show a lot of purple fringing wide open. The white letters in this scene are always a good test of fringing, and from this test, the f2 does appear to fringe a little more than the f1.8, but it's not significantly bad. Regarding flares, and using the lenses as walk-around lenses, I've not felt that they suffer from major flares or light blowouts, even though their coatings are quite rudimentary. On the other hand, if you point the lenses straight into very bright light, they do flare quite dramatically, like many other old lenses. And it's not just flares from the front. The lenses can also show signs of light reflecting off the aperture blades back onto the sensor. These fascinating flares are an example of that. The f1.8 seems to produce more interesting artifacts. If you enjoy capturing alien-looking objects, then the f1.8 may be better. On the other hand, judging from my shots, if you want cleaner sunbursts, then the f2 is better. So now you've seen the comparisons of the Pancolar f1.8 and f2, it's time to give you my conclusions about the lenses. In reverse order, I'll begin with the f2. One of my favourite pieces of camera gear is the Exakta VX1000 with its Pancolar f2. I just love the looks. Not sure I'd enjoy using the camera so much as it's quite a handful, but it looks great. On digital cameras, the f2 is a fine old lens. It's sharp enough wide open, with lovely bokeh, especially if you like swirly effects, and stop down the lens performs very well. It's sharp with glorious colours. The designers really nailed their brief on the colours, a definite improvement on the old Biotar. The Exakta mount version sometimes slips under the radar on internet sales sites, so if you're looking for a lens like this, and you're happy to use an Exakta adapter, the adapters are not hard to find, then I do recommend this lens to you. Now, what are my thoughts on the radioactive Pancolar f1.8? Well, in other videos, in rankings of the best M42 fast 50s for bokeh, I've been a big advocate of the lens's wider open rendering. And I haven't changed my opinion. I think it's one of the best vintage 50mm lenses for beautiful bokeh. It doesn't have the more eccentric effects of other lenses, the imperfect character flaws that make vintage lenses so much fun to use. Instead, the Pancolar f1.8 is more of a perfect bokeh lens, sharp wide open, with lovely, smooth, dreamy bokeh in the right conditions. If you compare the lens to one of its direct M42 competitors, the Mare Optic Görlitz Oriston 50 f1.8, the Oriston is a highly regarded bokeh lens, but the Pancolar is better, even smoother in my experience. The downside, as I said, is it lacks the out-of-focus effects of, for example, a Biotar or a Helios, but you can always buy a Pancolar f2 for that. In the 10 years I've owned the lens, I've enjoyed the warm tones its radioactive glass produces, both wide open and stop down, the sort of tones that makes it a wonderful lens for capturing autumnal colours and more atmospheric shots. And for this reason, I resisted de-yellowing it. So if you're into beautiful bokeh and very warm golden tones from a 50mm lens, then a radioactive Pancolar might just be the lens for you. However, this is a pretty narrow spec for a lens that costs as much as it does to buy online today. I was lucky to have purchased my copy 10 years ago, when the prices for 8-bladed versions were not as inflated as they are now. If you spend this kind of money on the lens, expecting it to perform miracles, I think you may be disappointed. As an all-purpose standard 50mm lens, the Pancolar is not a world-beater, not compared to more modern fast 50s, and not compared to some of the excellent faster lenses on the market. And I should reiterate here that I'm only talking about my 8-bladed radioactive version, not the later multi-coated 6-bladed versions. So where does this leave my own Pancolar f1.8? Well, after starting this video and taking a bucket load of new photos with the lens, I've decided to de-yellow it. Quite frankly, I've exhausted my enjoyment of those golden tones. The lens and I need a new challenge, and I'd really like to see how it performs colour-wise with clear glass, the way it was designed to be used originally. So I'll stop the video here and now, and if and when I manage to de-yellow the lens, I suspect this could take some time, I'll post an update. In the meantime, please comment below, especially if you own one of the other versions of these Pancolars. I'll be very interested to read your views. And until the next time, all the best.